So we're now moving on to our theme of strengthening skills for sustainability, and I'm delighted to welcome Gary Kass to give a provocation on this subject. And Gary is visiting professor at the Centre for Environment and Sustainability at the University of Surrey. So over to you, Gary. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Liz, and hello to everybody. Good morning. I hope you can hear me well enough. Yeah, so I've been asked to be provocative, which is one of my favourite modes of being. So I'm very happy to do that. So this is a very condensed version of a talk I gave at Surrey, the Rolling Cliff lecture in November, and I'll share the link to that when I finished talking. So really thinking about the skills and taking that forward from the vision that Ethne's has described, and it was an absolute pleasure to be involved in that visioning process. I thought that was absolutely wonderful, and the product that's come out at the end is just fabulous and lovely to see that that's being merged into and forming the basis of the next IES strategy. So this is basically what I'm going to talk about today. Actually, this is a kind of visual abstract, and it really comes along to this idea that if we want to take action towards sustainability through the SDGs, or indeed other frameworks and planetary health frameworks, etc., then we basically need to ensure that our people out there in the world are competent to do so. But that competence needs to be driven towards building the capacities for people to act. So this kind of references a little to words of the wonderful Amartya Sen, who starts off by talking about environmental scientists as being sustainability scientists as being informed agitators. And I think we would all love to be producing many more informed agitators as we go forward. But more fundamentally, what Amartya Sen talks about is a kind of capability approach, really, this notion that what people can achieve from the resources that they have available, and what functions that they can then perform in terms of what's realized through various enabling factors, or as he puts it, conversion factors. So this is the basic theory of change, if you like, that we bring knowledge, skills, and behaviours together to form competence. Those competencies are aimed towards building certain capacities, which then are enabled for action. So just to give a quick overview then. So there's been a lot talked around the key competencies of sustainability. The KCS is very much based on the work that UNESCO put out in 2017, and there's been some further work since then. The European Commission, through the work that Bianchi did in 2021, and various others have kind of added a little bit, tweaked a little bit around some of these competencies. But I think we've pretty familiar with these now. These are pretty well established and pretty solid. And you can see right from the top of the list is systems thinking. So it very much follows on from what Ethne said about systems thinking being at the core of wanting to build the competency for sustainability. But alongside those, and I should absolutely say that all of these competencies are related to each other. So you can't just pick and choose them. You've got to do them all, and you've got to understand how they link to each other. So you can't think about changing a system unless you can think ahead about what that system might want to be, or what you might like that system to be, and what might affect how that system change might happen. So you need to develop the skills for anticipation, or futures, or foresight. It's all about choice, and so we need to understand the normative situation, the values in play at that time. We need to be able to make choices, and that's really what the art of strategy is about, choosing between alternatives. We can't do this ourselves, so we need to collaborate. And all the way through this process, we need to make sure we are thinking critically and not taking anyone's word for it, and being completely self-aware of our own positioning in all this. And all this hopefully will come together to provide you, to provide colleagues with the competencies for integrated problem solving. So that's what the key competencies are. But what I would suggest, and I have suggested and will continue to suggest, is that those competencies on their own are all well and good, but don't necessarily take us very far forward. So we need to be able to drive those competencies towards specific capacities for making progress on sustainable development. So Alicia Harley and Bill Clark from Harvard back in 2020, in their review of sustainability science, suggested these 6, what they refer to as capacities. Again, they're all linked with each other, so we have to kind of think of them as a set. And they start with measuring sustainable development properly. And I put properly in inverted commas. Basically, we measure sustainability and sustainable development in all sorts of terrible ways, mainly resource accounting. And we need to kind of develop much more holistic ways of thinking about sustainable development, such as inclusive wealth. We need to be linking knowledge with action, very much at the heart of what IES and CEDHE and environmental education is all about. We need to be able to make sure that that is enabled through mechanisms such as co-production and co-design, and really kind of recognizing some of the implications, as Ethne referred to, of what makes for an effective science policy interface, making sure that the work is credible, making sure the work is relevant, and making sure the work is legitimate. We also need to ensure that people have the capacity to adapt to shocks and surprises. So one thing we do know is that surprises are inevitable. And so keeping the system going becomes quite an important capacity. But also at the same time, we're looking to transform those systems. So we need to understand how system change happens and what gets in the way of that, and what can enable that. So we need to be thinking, how do we adapt to shocks and surprises, keeping the lights on whilst changing the system? Through all of this, we need to be making sure we're promoting equity, and really taking EDI issues very seriously, as Ethne has referred to. And in order to make all of this happen, we need to make sure that governance arrangements can actually facilitate all these other capacities. So that's the general building blocks, if you like. We've got this notion of competencies. We've got this driving those competencies towards building these specific capacities. So some key messages, really, we need to be much more explicit about the way we embed those key competencies. Now, there's some interesting questions from a pedagogy kind of perspective about how explicit we do this. Do we have specific modules or specific lectures or courses in each of those capacities and competencies, or do we try and embed them through everything we're doing? But we need to be linking these explicitly to those capacities, and I think that's a new thing. And I think one thing we could all do as a community is think about how those competencies play into those capacities. But again, recognizing they're not kind of individual, they come as sets. So again, kind of a systems thinking perspective. I think one of the other aspects as well, working in both within practice in Natural England and being involved with the learning and development strategy there, and also now at Surrey, but also at Royal Holloway, one thing I've kind of recognized is that education tends to focus on individuals and building individual competence and capacity. Talk about the, enhancing the power of one. I would contend that to make proper progress on sustainability, no one person can be a master in all of those competencies and all of these capacities. We need to think about how do we build collective competence and capacity, and moving from the power of one to the power of many. So I think that's another thing we need to kind of think about, because fundamentally we need the system as a whole to be collectively competent and have that capacity, and not just focus on individuals. And when in the lecture, if you want to watch it, and as I said, I'll post the link, I suggested that a football team with 11 goalkeepers is not likely to be very successful. So you kind of need people with different skills in order to form that team. So how do we build that kind of team? And fundamentally, just coming back to Amartya Sen, which is always a good thing to do, and talk about what he referred to as these conversion factors, or these enabling factors. What are we actually doing in terms of leadership, commitment, and governance to drive this kind of agenda forward? Do we have the right kind of curriculum? Do we have the right kind of learning programs and assessment frameworks that can really do this? One one experience I had at Surrey recently was suggesting that we created focusing on the anticipation competence, that we created a horizon scanning cell with students, and the director of the centre thought it was a great idea, and then there was a pause, and then the inevitable but arrived, and the but was, but how would it be assessed? You know, what kind of credits would it carry? And the answer was, it's not designed to do that. It's not really an accessible and creditable kind of activity. It's just a necessary capacity. So I think that kind of structural issues need to be focused on. What kind of support and training and resources available, not just for students, but also for teachers and learners and assessors and the whole system, because this is quite a new way of thinking about things. But also, it's not something that, as I say, individuals can do, and so partnerships between courses, between schools and faculties and universities, and between academia and others through collaborations and networks become really important as well. So that's it. Those are my key messages, and hopefully that's provocative enough for this morning, Liz.